3 videos, different lengths. I'm doing a little experimentation with the YouTube algorithm and stuff like that. So if you see that today, great. If not, then boo. Hopefully go watch the videos, go check out the channel. There's a lot of different perspectives of information going on that I am telling y'all about, and you're missing out if you're not watching the videos. And if you want more notifications, yada yada yada, you know, there's a bell, there's all sorts of tools and stuff, right? Technology. Now, that is a good segue into desensitization, because what does technology do? It desensitizes us. It desensitizes us inherently, whether we realize it or not, because it gives us easier access to different experiences, to different forms of experiences, to be able to see other people's experiences. Just like how you're looking at my window here, I'm seeing you know, I'm experiencing my background, the behind the scenes, how the whole system, this recording system works and everything else, which is allowing me to tell you all this other stuff, right? It's easy. Instead of me having to go out in the middle of the street and yell at a crowd for hours and hours and yo, what's good? How's it going? Um, yeah, you actually caught me not in the middle of yapping this time and with the screen here. So yay. But yeah, just going over a quick little rundown into the idea of desensitization versus censorship and all that other stuff. Papers coming along. I mean, there was more work that I did with Claude, because I'm trying to work on that visualization of that graph, the pizza chart thing that I was showing everyone. But in terms of, I mean, updating this, so this is the pizza chart. This is explaining at least the idea of what the axioms create in terms of bounds, with the lower bound of existence, upper bound of existence, how that creates a circle, and how that total mass energy in existence and form, you know, how we can measure that and measure the movement of time as it changes from a form of complexity into something simpler, which, I mean, it depends on how you're using this, using relativity and what you're looking at, but total mass energy, so energy that has mass, things that we can observe, right? Existence itself, compared to things that we can't necessarily easily observe, like particles, fundamental particles, quantum particles, which inherently make up space, the space that's around us and the distance between things. As we learn more about quantum mechanics and stuff like that. And also, I looked into the EPR paradox too, and a couple of other different topics for my own learning, because I know there's been some other channels going on about that. I'm just trying to find my creator dashboard again real quick. There we go. But overall, yeah. Oh, you publish yours? Oh, sick. Oh, congratulations. Yeah, friggin'. So I worked on this whole pizza chart, and then the last stream I did, I added this part in. So using kind of that framework and of analysis, like how we can measure existence relative to what doesn't exist in space and stuff like that, we can also use this in understanding of possibility, because possibility is what could happen, and imagination correlates with understanding possibilities, because, you know, we, in order to understand what's possible, we kind of have to imagine it. And the same thing with impossible, we kind of have to imagine it. The only way that we really experience it is if it comes into existence in some way, and it adds consequences to experience through interactions and all that other stuff. And no problem. There's like 10 downloads in less than a month, as well as 20-ish views, which, yeah, no, that is, wow. Is that what it's titled? The Higgs field fluctuations? I don't mind taking a look on stream either, because I mean, that is, it's more stuff that I can check out. No, it's okay. Oh, wait, you mean you don't mind or you do mind? My bad. Anti-Higgs postulate. Fair, fair. Yep, fair. That's why I was asking. Fair. All right. But yeah, I'll keep that in mind for later when I'm with the family and see if I can find it. I want to assume it's on that Axioms or whatever that website's called with all the theorems, but I mean, if people are able to find it, then I should be able to find it too. But yeah, it's sick. Friggin' maybe one day it'll somehow relate to what I'm doing in some weird way. If it makes sense. Or maybe I just discovered something that already exists and I'm just explaining it differently. That could also be the case too, but I was trying to use that framework between that whole sliding scale, that idea of like a dumb as a rock and all that stuff, and individual consciousness. So the scales of consciousness against the scale of intelligence, and how we can measure the development of character and ego, and how character drives ego into, actions towards experiences. Oh yeah, I was thinking of Arvix. Yeah. Oh, okay. Uh, that's dope. That's really good, especially if Google's actually on your side. That was one weird thing I found out about my website, is that if I try to look it up on Google, even though I have it turned on that Google can put it up, it doesn't show up. Or at least I haven't been able to find it myself. And I tried this like a month ago. So this website that I'm showing you here, like, it's published, it's there, but you can't search it even though I have it allowed to search. And it's on, I mean, it's literally through Google, so I don't know. That's weird, but yeah. Yeah, last I left off with, measuring character, ego, and then starting to explain emotional response as well. Because as human beings, because of that limitation between lived experience and perceived experience and what we understand from both, because both exist because we both perceive and live through things simultaneously. And both of those, even if it's the same experience, it's that duality factor, that between how conscious you are, how aware you are of things, as well as how intelligent you are, how easy it is for you to understand reality or truth, is going to determine how well you understand the differences between lived perceived experiences, which feed back into how your character builds, because your character is built off what you've experienced. Your decisions, your morality, everything. And that drives ego. And I was able to tie it at least to ID, super ego, as well as ego as the factor, the driving factor. So stuff that exists in crazy things. Anti-Higgs is not an uncommon search term. I mean, you would think that anti-Higgs, I mean, exists because I mean, there's the W bosons and there's the, aren't there like plus and minus when it comes to bosons? There's W and B bosons, and I know there's different interactions between the two and how, I mean, they give mass to energy depending on the density of that energy. So, I'm gonna look up anti-Higgs. Not your paper, just anti-Higgs boson. I mean, this is what Google would say, but no separate anti-Higgs, its own antiparticle. Yeah, that's what. Yeah, because there's a plus and minus. So that's basically what I'm saying. It's just the term anti-Higgs. I mean, that's a proper term and easy for us to understand. So yeah, neutral particle. It's just like how we have protons, neutrons, and electrons. It's kind of like a rule of three, except its own. What was it? Higgs boson is a neutral particle, meaning it has no electric charge, but self-antiparticle, particles that have no charge, like the photon and Higgs boson, are their own antiparticles. Does that have to do with spin? Identical to itself. like spin and anti-spin basically, and that interaction. Hmm. Oh, that's cool. And the anti-neutron. Yeah, it's still so much about particles in general. That is really cool that you were able to bite down and explore this topic even further. So I'm definitely excited to look through it and see if at least my logic and everything else also relates to that in some way. This is like, at least my idea is, this is the idea like super relativity, basically, making sense of the insensible using like laws that exist. But yeah, I was looking up the EPR paradox. So that whole 4-page paper on basically how either quantum mechanics is wrong or just well, not wrong, but it's a paradox. But it might be incomplete, but at the same time maybe it's incomplete because the things that it describes are things that we can't actually experience, and might fall in line to kind of just explain like the history of space itself, just like how we measure neutrinos as a way to like gauge the age of the universe. So there's still so much more to particles that we got to explore. Oh, he dipped. Anyways, so make this video make sense. Talking about desensitization, back on topic. So we have this whole character ego, how all this relates in some way, shape, or form. And it relates because of experience, the perception of experience, and the real consequences from experiences, especially due to local causality, which is partly explained within the EPR paradox paper itself. That, I mean, local causality is such a big player when it comes to existence and relativity. I mean, at the same time, to be relative to something, you need to have some sort of interaction with it, right? You need to have some sort of comparison. Even relativity of like distance, how we measure momentum, movement, etc. These sort of things all do with that understanding of relativity and how it affects different aspects of reality. So just like consciousness is a process of understanding, a process of realization, process of measuring existence itself, depending on how you utilize the ideas, it can also help explain the potential consequences to understanding too much, as ego and character relative to experiences, we can gain more measurements going further, as someone's character and ego relative to the experience and the type of consequences that come from an experience or what they perceive. Because if, say, if I'm looking at something through a TV screen, it's not the same as living through it. Like if I'm looking at like a war movie or something like that, there's gunfire everywhere, I'm at the safety and comfort of my own home, I'm not emotionally being pressed in that such way. I'm not living through that experience. So my perspective is going to fundamentally be different than if I was there fearing for my life and then looking into a corner hoping that a bomb doesn't blow up in my hands, right? Or something like that. Because then your observer, like you as an observer, there's a whole set of different consequences that are affecting your character and ego in that moment in time. And desensitization plays a huge role in that comfort, both between the lived and perceived experience and how character and ego play into that, which is driven by how conscious and how well you understand reality. Because the better you understand things, then inherently you do become more desensitized to those things. But even as you understand emotions, the more you understand anything, the better you get with it. the better you're able to handle those things, because you're able to backtrack to the source, you're able to understand it, and with understanding comes acceptance. With acceptance comes more comfort, that whole idea of enlightenment, as that carries as a factor relative to consciousness, because comfort is very important to how we as humans mentally stay stable, you know? Because that comfort, the more comfortable we are when analyzing things, the easier it may be for us to perceive certain aspects of that experience. Whereas if we were in the middle of that experience in actuality, living through it in reality, our perspective is going to be much more different in that instance, in that circumstance. Because, I mean, if guns and bombs are going off, you're not seeing things from a camera on the wall. You're not seeing things from that. You have to rely on the senses, your perspective, your perception, in order to evaluate what's going on. And then you use your character, which is basically the buildup of memory of your experiences, in order to deal with those situations and the possible consequences that you can imagine from understanding the truths of those situations. It's like if you give someone like a bazooka that's never loaded a bazooka before, chances are they might blow themselves up. Whereas someone that knows how to load a bazooka, knows how to handle it, chances are they're not going to blow themselves up. It's kind of that simple. And that memory, as we explained earlier, I mean, granted, there are parts of the brain that might be able to remember these experiences, but typically we remember them through emotional response, and remembering those feelings, those sense, like the feedback system that is within our brain with synapses and all the chemicals that are in there that help drive that feedback, internal feedback system. And comfort is exactly tied to that, our feeling of comfort and being comfortable, not just in the physical sense where our nerves might be feeling pain or might not. As we age, obviously our nerves and our body, parts of our body, they have different pressures associated with them. Our nerves feel differently, they start wearing down more, and things are a little bit more sensitive in some areas. Things change over time, and that level of comfort might deteriorate over time, or it might get better. Saying maybe if you're replacing limbs or regrowing limbs or dealing with those responses, those pain receptors, in such a way that you get relief, you're getting direct comfort from the lived portion of that as well as the perceived, because our brains is what's processing our perception, our faculties of perception, which help us understand, which also goes into how conscious we are, depending on how well those faculties of perception work. And that's just the reality of how we exist. So desensitization plays a huge role in both character and ego. As, I mean, the more experiences you have in general, whether lived or perceived, I mean, there's a difference, like we just discussed, between what the consequences of lived and perceived might offer, depending on the type of experience that it might be. But when we see things more on a television screen with comfort, these the fact that we're seeing those experiences with such comfort lends more toward just straight desensitization and not truly understanding the significance of those experiences, which leads to the amount of misinformation and how certain classes of people live and decide certain aspects of the world, because they're not experiencing those things. They're not truly living through those events. They most likely don't understand the harsh truths and reality of things like genocide or mass casualty events or anything like that, because they're viewing it through a screen. They just see it's a number. They're viewing it from their own comfort. They're not being pressed physically, therefore they're missing that understanding or that potential. Some people are able to think outside their head. They're able to question it. It's genuinely probably the only way to address desensitization and such a way is the question, well, how does this actually feel, instead of just looking at it and being like, well, it is what it is, right? So how we handle desensitization also explains a lot with character development and how ego is driven towards certain experiences. Because, say, I mean, just like you can take Batman, for instance. He was a kid that saw his parents, like, got godded right in front of him, That's an experience that built the character that he was today. If that didn't happen, if he didn't see that firsthand, say if he was at his parents' house or something like that, he didn't see all the nuances and factors that played out within that actual lived experience that his parents went through, he might not have been a superhero vigilante Batman to begin with, because he probably wouldn't exactly understand the effects that type of crime would have on his family, on himself, or if anything. He wouldn't have that genuine sense of fear looking at the person at that moment. The only thing that they would really be feeling from the emotional response is, the anger, the rage aspect of that experience, not necessarily the fear of actually being there, not having the comfort being really pressed. So between comfort and understanding versus the lived and perceived experience is where we can derive more factors that build character and drive ego, and that also feed into this whole feedback system depending on how conscious or how intelligent someone is. Now, granted, someone could be more intelligent not living through every experience in the world, because maybe they've seen so much, maybe they've questioned things a certain way where they actually try to understand how people might feel during certain situations, like truly, right? Having a sense of empathy. Now, all these things, again, are a little bit relative to the whole idea of ego and character. And when you don't understand these things, misunderstanding tends to run wild, ignorance tends to run wild, and we start living in the type of reality that we're living in today. We start seeing these certain individuals that have ungodly amounts of money and wealth, which continue to tie money and wealth to human survival through, I mean, capitalism, but with a complete disregard to the human individual experience, to everyone else's character and ego. It's come to a point where the wealthiest of people just genuinely don't experience what other people experience. They're just ignorant. They're not pressed. They're totally comfortable with their lives. They don't give a shit. They're absolutely desensitized to death and despair and everything else going on, because, I mean, they just hear it from one person or another, but they don't take the time to question the truth of any of it. They're just like, well, it just happened, whatever. Who cares? All I care about is, being comfortable. And that's a type of ignorance that exists. No matter what your wealth class is, some people just want to live as comfortably as possible, regardless of how their neighbor might be living or how their kids might be feeling or anything. There's that sort of ignorance and loss of significance which further desensitizes one's mind. So when someone loses consciousness, the ability and faculties that facilitate understanding, because fundamentally that's what it is. The more ignorant you are, the less conscious you are, by definition. The less woke. But there's real consequences towards character and ego of the individual when such factors play a huge role in the future development of character and ego. Because a real person isn't going to simply change just because they saw something on the internet. They're not gonna change super drastically if they don't have to. If they're comfortable with how they're living and they see things, people dying all around them and stuff like that, but they're able to live in their carriage, trolley, whatever, just go by it, just doesn't affect them, doesn't matter, because they're comfortable with their lives. They're not going to change. That's just how it is. So understanding how all these factors play into emotion, desensitization, character, ego, how experiences are lived and perceived, these simple aspects of psychology that we already know to exist, that we've already defined, become much more easy to understand in relation to the experience and what and how it's perceived. And plus, based on the individual, their class of wealth, where they are in life, where they are in society, what their history is, understanding all these different factors, as well as the consequences of their actions and how they take certain actions and how they continuously do certain actions, regardless of if they even take the time to understand if there's an inherent ignorance to how they live their lives, because that plays into a measure of consciousness, as well as conversely with intelligence. So all of it matters, and this is just at least a little bit of understanding. Now, the last part is censorship. The whole idea of the existence of censorship, at least initially how I grew up to understand it, was, you prevent people that don't have as much experience to be introduced to things that would have them question different aspects of reality without any real guidance, right? Or seeing things and being like, well, that happens. Like, you get to see the cause and effect on TV, but you're so comfortable and so ignorant in your youth and lack of experience that you're able to completely misunderstand how that situation even came to be, how that experience came into existence, and how that experience actually affects the people involved, or the things involved, or the environment. That's like, I mean, if kids play games with the threat of nuclear war and they just get to indiscriminately nuke different countries in a video game without actually living or understanding, the damage that comes from that, without understanding, the events of World War II or anything like that, it's a lot easier for them to be like, all right, Mr. President, go nuke that country, go nuke this country. Especially when they get older and they're not pressed or they're not taught, like, if their comfort isn't being pushed, whether by themselves, understanding the reality of life and death, the beginning and end, understanding how other people might feel without stepping out of their own head. If they don't take the time to do that in such instances, they inherently get desensitized. And through that desensitization, they misunderstand more and more about reality, to a point where their understanding of reality is just plain wrong and delusional. So the more ignorant and desensitized a person gets, the more risk there is to perpetuating terrible experiences, because the development of one's character wasn't checked properly. Their comfort wasn't checked in such instances. And there's safe ways to check someone's comfort, to push on someone's comfort without threatening their existence, without hurting them. Typically through dialogue and through communication and conversation, we can do that. But when someone's so ignorant to a point where they just don't give a shit or don't want to take the time to even have that conversation, to think outside of their heads, there's not many other options left for them to understand the truth of the experiences that they're ignoring until it happens to them, until they have to live through it and have to act in such a way that they're pushed into discomfort because their survival is being threatened. So not to say that it's right to threaten people's survival and stuff, but there's a whole, that local causality, how cause and effect plays a role in reality, interactions through space and time, and how we perceive those interactions through space and time, and how we take the time or don't take the time to understand the truths of those consequences from those interactions or those experiences, because that's what an experience is an interaction that happens within space and time. It's something that happens. That's what an experience is, whether you live through it or perceive through it, or whether you observe it or not. Because again, you might not need to be there, obviously, for something that happened on the other side of the world. And whether you see it or not, that's a whole other thing. And that is where censorship can be detrimental, because you can censor the worst things online that could be happening somewhere else. But that means that those people are inherently ignorant to those things. They don't understand that that's going on the other side of the world. And that type of thing is allowed to propagate due to its causality, this local causality. And there's no way to interfere, there's no way to interact. It's similar to how when we try to measure how slow technology developed in the early days, because there wasn't that whole instantaneous way of sending information, showing people experiences, right? There's no video, there wasn't even phones. And it took a long time. It took a lot of time for people to even send messages to one another. It would take people like a half a year to a year. It would take them sometimes years to send back, a response to a question. And through that time, one has to sit there and deal with their experiences. They have to deal with whether they're comfortable or not. And granted, when there's more time that one has to live through, there's more of a risk of them being uncomfortable, especially when nothing changes or they don't make any change to make themselves more comfortable. So all these factors play in, again, with ego and character, and it's important to understand when analyzing an individual, as well as how an individual may or may not interact with certain experiences that they may or may not live through, and also to understand kind of the super deterministic ways that humanity works, the patterns, understanding patterns and how they work, understanding emotional response and how it's a response to experiences. And typically emotions, not even just typically, it's fundamentally love and hate are both relative to existence. It's the perspective of existence of something and how that relates to the existence of something else. That is just how it fundamentally works. So that's a little bit tie into both desensitization and censorship, kind of introducing those ideas. I'll go more in depth and we'll do another whole chart, maybe even expand on this one. It's on the website. I'll put the website link in the description as well. And yeah, so go check out what we have here. Go ponder. Go test these ideas out against, your own life. How you live your life. Ask questions, get answers. That's how we even figured out physics in the first place. That's how we figured out math in the first place. Someone asked a bunch of questions like, how does this work? And then they figured it out. That's just how it is. And if you want to understand how desensitization affects society and how censorship affects society, and depending on what's being censored, what's causing the desensitization, what types of relationship it has with comfort, because the comfort is directly tied to loving existence in a sense. Comfort is, how much trust you have that nothing bad's going to happen immediately to your existence. How much belief you have, how much trust you have in reality itself, that you have plenty of time to live. You have plenty of time to just sit there and do the things that you want to do that make you happy. There's less stress, right? There's less of a need to act, there's less pressure. And without that pressure, propagates comfort. Comfort falls in line with happiness, just fundamentally. No one's going to be comfortable being angry. No one's going to be comfortable being sad. Those are bad things. No one's really comfortable dying. Like, truly, no one's really comfortable dying unless they truly feel like they've done enough with their life, or that they just don't want to deal with the potential experiences that they believe they might have. That's how it all ties together. As I continue to misspeak, but I've been speaking for a lot today, so stopping by, check out the videos. We'll try to do something sciencey. If I had help doing video editing or had someone that could take some of the time burden off of me, That would help. Or you know what? Honestly, feel free to remix any of these things too. Like make shorts. I don't care. You can remix and everything. I know I have the options allowed on YouTube. You know, cut out whatever you want from these and just share it with your friends or ask questions. Be like, is this how reality works? Is this how character works? Start thinking of safe and healthy experiments for one, just to preface. Don't threaten your friend's existence. That's obviously not good. But you can ask yourself, just like, if someone did this to me, how would I feel? Right? If someone did that to me, and that will push your comfort if you actually place yourself in that circumstance and you ask the right questions. Like, how would it feel like if I lost a limb? How would I feel? I wouldn't like it, obviously. It's like simple things like that that people just don't take the time to ask to combat properly misunderstanding, to work toward a true sense of understanding reality. And without that understanding of, how consciousness works, how understanding things work, then you're not going to understand things. You're just going to live life at the whim of everyone and everything around you, at the whims of your environment. You won't have any real possibility of changing your circumstances and changing your future. It's much more determined than you might think. And again, it goes along with this whole idea of consciousness and intelligence. Those scales feed into character based on past experiences and how those were processed and perceived, and also the consequences of those experiences or lack thereof on the individual. Those factors drive the ego, and then the ego drives the response to future experiences, and it all keeps feeding back into itself. So, anyways, we'll go over desensitization further. Thank you for stopping by. We'll also look at a couple of other things as well in regards to, well, life and how things work, but I gotta get ready to do other job stuff. So, till then, peace out, be safe out there. Uh, I don't know, man. Things are getting crazy, but we gotta work together to start realizing, the path that we're on, essentially. Anyways, till next time, this is Spark saying peace.